just to make sure everybody is here with us on Sunday morning, week 2. Hey, everybody, Sigmund Bloom here. You'll see over there, right? I got my right and my left mixed up. Over there, the wild man. Down there, the doc, Dr. Jene Bramel. Thank you, everybody. And we're going to get you up to date on everything you need to know here. And Doc, let's jump right in. Joe Mixon. And this is one of those situations where the question might not be, will he or won't he play? The question maybe that's better is, how much will he play?
Yeah, I don't think there's too much question that he's trending toward being active. The Zach Taylor regime is going to be a little bit different than the Marvin Lewis situation. So in the past, when players didn't practice much on Wednesday and Thursday, really didn't expect them to do much. But by video, the injury didn't seem to be that severe. The MRI was reassuring on Monday on Mixon's ankle. And he's been doing a little bit more on the rehab field, and then was allowed to at least test the ankle on Friday through the walkthrough. Did a little bit more on Saturday. The expectation is that he's going to go ahead and do some more in pregame warmups just to be sure. But the trend all week long has been positive, and the expectation is that he'll play. But as you said, that doesn't mean that he's going to play a lot. Gio Bernard is there, has been for a long period of time, is capable runner. Mixon hasn't been able to do much, and the conditioning may not be there, and they may not want to risk aggravation. So you can see a situation in which Mixon plays less on passing downs, as he may have in the past, and you may see Bernard mix in every other series instead of every third series, which is what the Bengals and many other teams have tended to do over time. So I feel like Mixon's cap is probably 12 to 15 touches, and you could easily see if there's an aggravation during the game or some sort of game script, either positive in the Bengals' favor or negative in the Bengals' favor, that they may not use Mixon as much in the second half. So you're hoping for as much as you can get out of those 12 to 15 touches, and it could definitely be a little bit lower than that, depending on how the game goes.
While we're on this game, Gene, let's touch on a few more things. Nick Bosa. And again, IDP players, or even just looking at this matchup, because Cincinnati's offensive line was not great against Seattle last week. What do we think about Bosa's ability to get pressure on Andy Dalton today?
I think we saw this last year with Matt Breida, and the Niners have done this in multiple situations where, you have a player who has a high ankle sprain who continues to aggravate it 3 to 4 weeks after the initial injury. But if he's feeling good enough to go, they're going to let him go. And that seems to be the case after not practicing Wednesday or Thursday. Friday, a lot more optimism. Yesterday, no real concern. It seems like he's going to play. But again, you're looking at pass rushing situations. It's nice, and then an edge rusher, although he's got to turn a little bit off the edge and dip and get off the edge, that probably not as big a deal as you might think of with, somebody on the outside, cornerback, safety, what have you, or even a linebacker who's got to get up through the trash. So Cincinnati's tackles are a little bit of an issue. Cordy Glenn is still out. They're still working through some issues along the offensive line. We're a little bit more successful than expected last week. Bosa played very well in his first game back from that high ankle sprain, but after tweaking it late in the game, you have to wonder how many snaps he's going to get. They're all going to be edge rushing snaps. So for those of you who are looking for sack production, there's a chance that he may be able to come through with something there. But I don't think you're going to see a 50 snap player with multiple chances to produce today.
Last one, Gene, and then I'm going to get Matt to weigh in on this, especially on the Cincinnati offense. When are we going to see Cordy Glenn play again?
Yeah, I don't know. Not to put him in the Jordan Reed category, but what I always tell folks is if we're inching through 3, 4, 5 weeks without an obvious return to play timetable, and Reed is obviously probably a little bit more closer than Glenn, then you have to be concerned. And we don't usually get a lot from the Cincinnati beat writers. They seem to have grown more concerned. They expected him, Glenn, that is, to at least do a little bit more leading into the first week of the year. Those last couple of weeks of the preseason, he was expected, at least by the beat writers, thinking that he was a veteran that they were just caution with. But he's not practiced in 3 weeks since the end of the preseason, and not even a limited practice. So this is stretching on and on. So when I say indefinite, I don't mean permanent absence, but it just means that until we see him do anything in practice, it doesn't even look like he's been cleared through the early stages of the protocol yet, which kind of suggests there's still some symptomatic issues that he's working through. So obviously not this week. You'd have to put next week questionable at best. And if he's not there next week, you have to wonder how much longer it's going to stretch.
All right, Matt, all offseason, I would get hot and bothered thinking about Arizona's offense and all the new possibilities. But we didn't look as we looked at Zach Taylor. I remember when Jonah Williams got hurt, it felt like the wind went out of the sails of thinking of Cincinnati as this new fantasy bonanza. But what we saw in Seattle was extremely promising. I thought Andy Dalton looked really comfortable in the offense as long as he's within structure, which is Andy Dalton. And this is without AJ Green. This is with that piecemeal offensive line. So what do we think about this new Cincinnati offense, and how should it be changing our views of Cincinnati players today at home against San Francisco, but also when we look ahead to AJ Green and Gene, week five-ish, hey buddy, for AJ Green?
I mean, the hope was that we'd see him for that Monday night game against Pittsburgh right around that time. That would have been week 4. But just getting out of the walking boot this week, he's got to regain strength. He has to be able to move and cut easily. I just don't see that happening in 2 weeks. Week 5 seems like it's probably the earliest at this point. Right. But even though the Bengals were telling us that they didn't expect him to need as much time as what injured reserve return 8 weeks would require, he might be right up against that by the time he's ready.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, Matt. I juked at the last second there.
Oh,
but
no worries.
As Gene said, this is the Zach Taylor regime, not the Marvin Lewis regime. So maybe that means they're patient. They, with the potency of the pass offense in week 1 and John Ross, et cetera, they can afford to be patient. But how did week 1 change your view of the Bengals going forward?
Honestly, it didn't, because Dwayne McFarland and I, when we were projecting this offense, we really looked at them in our series as the Los Angeles Rams of the Midwest, because that's really what that scheme was about. And when you look at all the things that are made out for Jared Goff, well, if that's true, then really Andy Dalton should be that test case for being the training wheels guy who's going to, have the appropriate training wheels put on his quarterbacking. And I'd say that Andy Dalton has always been a worse quarterback than Jared Goff, but people make it out to be, that Jared Goff needs training wheels. Well, Andy Dalton's getting the training wheels now. And on top of that, now you have a worse Brandon Cooks and John Ross, who, catching the ball is always an adventure. But when he does, he has great athletic ability. So for those who love speed, who love the flash, he's a flashy player, and he's gonna get enough opportunities, while AJ Green, their much more advanced Robert Woods, is out dealing with that ankle injury. And then you have Tyler Boyd, who plays the Cooper Kupp role, and he's approximately, I would say this, he's approximately Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp is probably one of the more underrated receivers in the league. But it's a good matchup, and they have a better tight end when he's healthy. So we'll see if Tyler Eifert continues to flash and be able to maintain what he does. So, in terms of what this offense does, the thing about Zach Taylor's offense, and that's similar about the Rams, is that it's a fairly simple scheme. It's a fairly straightforward scheme. So the offensive line isn't going to have to be, it has a pretty simple task ahead of what it does. And then a lot of the window dressing is upon the skill players, which is nice. And the skill players get to actually be skilled players and kind of match up to that name. So I think this offense is a good fit, and it helps out an offensive line that may get tested in the future weeks here as defenses start to figure out study some of the Rams tape and apply that to what the Bengals do, well, and what maybe they can't do quite as well. So it's a promising team with high upside, but it may have a little bit more downside to it in terms of week to week than what you've seen with the Rams, just because most of those players aren't as good.
Okay, so Matt, quick hitters, really kind of, again, we'll do the temperature scale, like cold to hot, right?
Sure.
I want to take a chance putting John Ross in my lineup today.
I mean, I think I think that you look at him as a wide receiver 3 with upside.
So you're not talking people out of Andy Dalton was my better fantasy quarterback last week. I'm wondering if I should play him this week.
I think that probably you can go that route and say that's I look at with San Francisco, and you look at that route. Yeah, I mean, he's probably a low end quarterback 1.
And it'll be interesting to watch too. You mentioned Boyd versus Kupp. I thought Boyd was a little more of a stationary target than Kupp is. When I watched Boyd last week, he was sitting down in spots and getting the easy yards for the offense. There were a few passes that he could have turned in some yard after catch. But I thought that the tight ends were utilized very well, especially CJ Uzoma, who has more athletic ability than Tyler Eifert at this point. So if you're looking for that Hunter, go ahead.
Yeah, you're probably seeing what you saw from Boyd is probably because he's playing against more zone. So receivers are always going to sit down in zone coverage, and the Seattle Seahawks play a lot of zone. So that probably makes a lot of sense for it. But you'll see him on the move a little more often when he gets guarded by man-to-man.
And Uzoma looked good as far athletically on his targets, and it seemed like going back to the preseason that Zach Taylor had drawn some stuff up to get the tight ends on plays like tight end screens to get some good yard after catch opportunity. On the San Francisco side, Matt, would you counsel people to not drop Dante Pettis yet?
Absolutely. I'd be telling people to buy low because this whole thing is hysteria. If you ask me, a lot of, I've even saw, I love Dan Hendry over at our site, and Dan does great work. You should check out his dynasty, rankings that he does every month. But he, in our roundtable this week, he talked about the narrative that was out there for Dante Pettis that Kyle Shanahan was being hard on him. Well, George Kittle confirmed that quote unquote narrative the week before the season, saying that, that this was done exactly to him. And when you look at Pettis, he even said to the media this week, unless he's just that much in the doghouse with Shanahan that they're not communicating, he says that he expects to see a lot more snaps and that he really wasn't right last week and that he feels healthier this week. And, even I believe there was a writer this week or yesterday that basically said that Pettis will probably eat into a ton of Deebo Samuel snaps. And Samuel actually struggled against press coverage. That's something that Jay Moyer over the RSP talked about when in his observations that he really struggled with that. And so we'll probably see those two guys split some snaps, as well as maybe Pettis cut into some of Marquis Goodwin's snaps if they move him around the formation. So I think he's a guy that went from being slightly overvalued due to the excitement to now being undervalued. And you're probably gonna be able to pick him up for a song from the guy who didn't know much about him and panicked when they overdrafted him.
And I think that going back to remember I watching Pettis at Washington, just a finesse player. And I think maybe Kyle Shanahan's kind of trying to nudge him to be have a little more edge, which may or may not happen. And then just like we saw last year, those finesse players, they're like sports cars. Everything has to be tuned just right. And like you said, he was hurt. So we should withhold judgment there. I just hope we get to see more Richie James. And we'll get to see more Raheem Mostert really quickly, Matt, for folks that might have been looking at him in deeper leagues as a waiver wire pickup, someone to stash away because, well, how long will Matt Breida stay healthy? What's in the RSP file on Raheem Mostert?
Well, I mean, he's certainly he's a physical back who plays with good quickness. He's going to hit the hole with conviction. So what you have really there is honestly a slightly slower and superior version of Tevin Coleman without the brand name.
Yeah.
But Kyle Shanahan's been familiar with Tevin Coleman, so he's always, that was his guy. So I think that what you get with Mostert though is probably a guy who can give you a little bit of a blend of Coleman and Freeman in terms of the smarts that Freeman has running between the tackles, but a little bit more of the athletic ability that a little bit of the finishing ability that Tevin Coleman doesn't always have unless you've like thrown him downhill and let him collide with somebody by accident.
So now, Gene, I'm going to go back to you. And Casey Allen in the chat room had a question. And Casey, and I appreciate that he did this. He made sure to say Gene, Jene. If you're a Hunter Henry owner, are you cutting him and committing to the stream? Or is there a reason to wait around? Give us the Hunter Henry update here.
I think that it probably entirely depends on how much room you have on your roster, what your roster size is, and what else there's available on the waiver wire. I think we can reasonably assume that this is going to be 4 to 6 weeks and then maybe a little bit of easing back in at that point. There will be some risk of re-injury, but hopefully they allow him to recover such that it's not a major problem. But you're going all the way out into potentially even week 9 and week 10. I'm not familiar with exactly when the Chargers bye week is, but we may not see him back for a little bit yet. And you're butting up against the playoffs at that point. So if you've got an easy place to stash and there's nothing of consequence on the waiver wire, then yeah, probably hold on to him, because you probably drafted him with the feeling that he was a top 5 producer at the position. But if not, then you probably need to move on and make a point of 2 weeks before, and we should get a sense of, we're hearing him run, he's starting to rehab. We won't necessarily hear him as being limited in practice necessarily, but we should hear how his recovery is going and make a point to pick him up a couple of weeks before he comes back. And we'll be talking about that as we go. But again, I don't know how you guys feel, but that would be a roster size dependent question.
Yeah. You might have to pick up CJ Uzoma or Blake Jarwin or someone like that to start this week if you were depending on Hunter Henry. And it's one of those questions, Gene, I always get, like, well, who would you get to pick up if you dropped Henry, or who would you have to drop otherwise to get that, to not take a 0 at tight end? Obviously, we don't want to take a 0 this early. Let's stay with this game, Gene. Mike Williams, and more than today, but run down today, how much potential does this have to affect his play, at least for, say, the next month? Pop up again? How much is this a tarnish, a stain on his season-long outlook?
Well, it didn't look to be anything too significant on video. The views that I saw were a little bit obscured, but it didn't seem to be anything significant. Ian Rappaport is reporting this morning there's not a structural issue, and all that means is that somebody has told him that his ligaments are intact. That doesn't mean that there's not something important going on in the knee, but that the Chargers are planning to find ways to get Mike Williams involved around the red zone. And that may have something to do with Hunter Henry's absence as well. So they just don't have a lot of big options around the red zone to use there. Other than some of the running backs and outside wide receivers they have. So is it going to affect his play today? Yeah, I went into yesterday when I wrote the injury expectations article on Saturday evening. I didn't think he was going to be active at all. There wasn't any optimism. They let him do a little bit on Friday. Anthony Lynn told reporters that he had a couple of days to convince Williams to convince Lynn that he'd be able to play, and then they activated a wide receiver from the practice squad on Saturday. So everything that we had seen from last Sunday toward the end of the game against Indianapolis through now suggested that he wasn't going to go. So it may be that they're just going to put him in very limited situations and try to find a way to get him open on the red zone. But although we've seen Rob Gronkowski, Calvin Johnson, lots of other players over the years be successful productively in those situations, I don't know that you want to put Mike Williams in that category today. I don't think the risk of aggravation is probably high, but hopefully what we see is maybe 10 to 15 snaps, no aggravation today, a little bit more practice next week, and then we move on from there. But would not be expecting much at all today.
And Gene, while we're on this game, we'll use this as a lead-in of offensive linemen back woes. We never want to hear that. Taylor Decker not going to play. It also doesn't look like Eric Fisher is going to play. We've got issues with David Bakhtiari, Cam Robinson's knee. Marcus Cannon is banged up. We know New England doesn't have much in terms of offensive line depth. How worried, again, is this the kind of thing that will pop up? Just, Zach Martin had that thing in the preseason, and we haven't heard anything about that yet. Is this going to be something that's just a blip, or is there any reason to think some of these could be longer reaching injuries on key offensive line?
They already are. And I think it would not be a stretch to say that nearly every offensive lineman has some measure of degenerative disc issues in the back, and they're going to crop up from time to time. You hardly ever hear about it just because offensive linemen don't like to talk about injuries, and they're going to play through whatever anyway. But this is not shocking. Some of these guys, like Tyron Smith, who's been dealing with this for years, like Zach Martin, who had some struggles last year with some similar issues, like David Bakhtiari, who sounds like, those guys, they may play from time to time, but they're still going to be dealing with this. And what we don't hear is whether or not it's just been a little bit of back spasm and it's not that big a deal, or some of these players have probably already had cortisone injections and epidural steroid injections during the preseason or earlier this year, and I hope that they'd be able to manage it throughout the regular season. And we're not going to know who those players are unless and until they start missing games and it comes out a little bit. So I'd say all these things are already concerns, and you hope that whatever treatment and rest and rehab has been prescribed is working well enough to keep them off the injury report and playing well going forward.
All right, let's look at this Detroit Chargers game, Matt. Both of these teams coming in off of overtime games, which is something to think about. Let's start with the Detroit offense, Matt, because first of all, and I think you were beating the drum on this, Matthew Stafford looks good. He looks really good. And even without Taylor Decker, they had some offensive line continuity. Now, what's difficult when we look at week 2, Matt, is that we had a faster pace. We had the Arizona defense, and just it may have given us a false impression of this offense, of how how many dropbacks Matthew Stafford's going to have in a game, etc. And you're looking at guys like TJ Hawkinson. If you go back to him and play him over a tight end that you drafted well ahead of him, if you were smart enough to draft him as your backup tight end, or even maybe flex him. We've got Kenny Golladay and Marvin Jones. I would expect Casey Hayward's going to be on Kenny Golladay. Danny Amendola mucks up this picture. He had that touchdown on busted coverage. And then we expected, or at least I expected, Detroit to steamroll Arizona. And Kerryon Johnson didn't really get on track. And C.J. Anderson got a lot of work. So really, you could look at this and you could see one or two or three hot plays here, or you could see zero with a wait and see aspect of, hey, let's wait and see what they look like when they're not facing Arizona, especially if Taylor Decker's backup is going to, Tyrell Crosby, I think, who could be solid, is going to have to face Melvin Ingram and Joey Bosa, even though they don't have Derwin James. What's your outlook for the Lions offense today, Matt?
Well, I mean, I think when you look at this, it's also about the Chargers, who don't have Derwin James. So when you look at, what happened with them, with Jacoby Brissett, Brissett, while he only had 190 yards, he threw 2 touchdowns, really should have had 3 if Eric Ebron could have held on to the third one. Mm-hmm. And he was 21 for 27. I mean, they were able to run over the Chargers as well, or run over the Chargers as well. Marlon Mack with 174 yards. I mean, certainly you look at Detroit, and the thing is that they play a lot of 2 tight end sets, which is, they did that last week, probably because their one is that they have a decent blocker in Jesse James, who's a short area guy, and that could allow them to do a lot of flexible things with TJ Hawkinson as the outside player, who could be in the slot and who could threaten down the seam. So I think Hawkinson is absolutely a must start this week against the Chargers defense that I don't think is going to be very good against tight end play. And then you also have, if they're going to cover Golladay with Hayward, then Marvin Jones is going to be a good play this week. If they're not going to do that, so I think that you're looking, to me, Golladay is the more up and down player. I think Jones is probably the underrated option in this offense. And then you look at the fact that they're using 2 tight ends. I think they use that. One of the benefits of that is it does cover up some of the guard play. It gives them a little bit of help. Not the guard play, tackle play. It gives them a little bit of help at each of the tackles in terms of what side they want to run to. If they want to run to one side where their tackle's a little less experienced, they're going to have 2 tight ends to that side. They can do a little bit of work there. They can also get a little use of a fullback in terms of what Hawkinson does to move around. So I don't think the run game is going to be as bad as maybe we would fear if tackle play, is not with the starters. But the bigger issue is does that mean they have to keep Hawkinson in a little bit more due to the pass rush with Melvin Ingram and such? But I think that, again, using those 2 tight end sets and the way that they're going to go with it, Hawkinson's a strong play. Golladay is kind of boom bust. I think Marvin Jones is a good flex play with upside. And Amendola, I know Amendola could have a really big week, but I think that you kind of wait and see with him to see how consistent. I think he's the one to see how consistent a part of the offense he's really going to be.
And I agree with you on Hawkinson. I have him as my number 4 tight end. Real quickly, Matt, for folks that lost Hunter Henry and didn't really have a suitable backup, have to go to the waiver wire, maybe what would a plan be if they have to go to the waiver wire, or maybe someone you think they could trade for, even buying high, not necessarily buying low? What's your advice?
Yeah, I think I'm a believer that you can stream tight end play based on the matchups, because teams seem to historically be bad, year after year against certain tight ends. So what you can do is go to Football Guys and look at the defensive game logs, and you can oftentimes see who gives up a good amount to tight end play. And as long as the scheme's the same and the players, the linebackers and safeties tend to be the same from the past 2 to 3 years, you can probably have a good bet that they're going to give up a fair bit to the tight end, and you can probably stream some of that. So I'd say that's one way to go. And if you're in a league where it's a little bit less depth and you're going to have to, you're going to have to fight, go after it. I think tight end's pretty easy to acquire, as a whole. And there's going to be plenty of teams out there that drafted probably a pair like Jason Witten, Greg Olson, Darren Waller, Delaney Walker, along with a player that they picked higher. And I think that you can get one of those 3 to 4 players, and you're going to have to pay a little more. But at the same time, I think you can give up a wide receiver 3 and still probably be able to get a wide receiver 3 off the waiver wire at some point this early if you come strong to the hole like that.
Gene, we already mentioned Eric Fisher with that groin, may or may not play. Rob Bridges had a question. We covered this on Thursday. Are you interested in buying Tyreek Hill for his injury? Has a high chance of or re-injury once he returns. You can touch on that. But the guy I'm actually most interested in when I'm projecting this game, Gene, is Gary Conley, who went out with that scary-looking neck injury on Monday night, and he was doing a fine job on Emmanuel Sanders, and then he goes out, and then Emmanuel Sanders has a fantasy game basically in less than a half. So what's latest on Conley? And again, folks, check out the Thursday night show. We stretch out into some of these issues, but give folks just the real basics on the nature of Hill's injury and why the re-injury and even projecting a timeline is a little more difficult.
Yeah, Conley's going to play, which is surprising based on, a lot of times players will be carted off the field for precautionary sake and taken to the hospital for precautionary sake. That wasn't necessarily the case with Conley, but to have him back to practice already on Wednesday suggested that they weren't worried about a concussion and that they thought that his next strain, or whatever it turned out to be, was not so serious where he couldn't protect himself on the field. And although I don't think he ever returned to a full practice this week, there's never been any indication that he's not going to play. Maybe he's limited. Maybe there's a little bit more going on there, but the Raiders have always been kind of on the lesser side on conservative things go. We've seen them return players pretty quickly in the past if they have a comfort level with them. I must have missed something. There must be someone or some entity out there saying that this Tyreek Hill injury is a bigger deal than that it may initially seem to be. There's, going back and looking through NFL comps, there's been very few players, and with the first one theoretically being Danny Amendola in 2012, there's only 4 players I found that have had this injury. So I don't know that we can say that there's a high risk of recurrence. The 3 players that returned within the same season returned without any issue, and they returned within 4 to 6 weeks. So every one of these injuries is different. I'm not saying that there may be something going on with Tyreek Hill that we're not aware of, but for him to be reportedly doing fine the night of the injury and being discharged from the hospital the day after means that those very important blood vessel and other structures underneath where that collarbone comes into the breastbone there were not injured. So at that point, it becomes just like any other ligament sprain. The ligament that helps hold that joint together has to heal, and that takes time, a minimum of 6 weeks and probably longer before it's fully healed. But as we've seen with many, many players over the years at lots of different joints, the joint has to be stable and doesn't necessarily have to be fully healed. So yes, there's a risk of re-injury just like there is anywhere else, but because it's a relatively rare situation, if everybody on the medical staff and Tyreek Hill is comfortable with a return, then that's a possibility. So we saw Amendola return in 5 weeks. We saw Roethlisberger return in 4. We saw Darqueze Dennard return last year in 5 weeks. All those injuries were a little bit different. Amendola's was the most like Hill from what we know. So I think that's a reasonable expectation. Jay Kumaro gets included in this discussion, but I think his prolonged recovery, it turned out to be 11 weeks, was more of a function of the Packers were able to use injured reserve return because he wasn't a vital part of the offense as Amendola and Roethlisberger were in the past. And so, what could have been a 5 to 6 week injury there as well turned out to be 8 to 12 just because of the vagaries of roster construction. And I think we'll have a better sense as we go. So I think a reasonable target, you could see Kansas City target the divisional game against Denver in week 7. That would be right at 6 weeks. That's kind of the over-under that I've set as an expectation. They did not put him on injured reserve with a designation to return, which means they think they can get him back in that 5 to 6 range. And, we'll see how his rehab progresses over the next 3 to 4 weeks. But I think 6 weeks is the sweet spot there, and hopefully he'll hit it.
And where that brings up, Matt, Andre Roberge, he said he'd heard our voices but hadn't seen our faces. I hope you're not disappointed, Andre. Anyone playing Mecole Hardman this week? What do we think? How frisky do we get with Hardman against Oakland, and with that Conley situation, it's almost like Conley being healthy and playing would be better for Hardman, because if he's making Sammy Watkins less attractive target, then that makes Hardman the deep shots looking better. Of course, DeAnthony Thomas is also going to get some extra playing time here. What do we think of Hardman this week, Matt?
I think that he's a boom bust play still, because it doesn't really matter about who's really covering him. It's about whether or not they can get someone, get coverage to be busted and for him to be wide open, because he's at his best either as a runner or in the open field or on checkdowns with a defender way over top having to come downhill on him, because when he has to actually catch the ball in tight traffic, he struggles. He always struggled at Georgia at that. He's up and down with it. And he's better at it when it's kind of a rebound situation where you throw the ball up for grabs. He turns around, posts up, and catches the ball. But if he has to play a fade route, if he has to play an out route or a comeback where a defender might interfere and he has to work over that defender or work around him, or there's a prospect of the defender who's been playing him tight and bumping him throughout the route, he gets distracted. So to me, he's not really a factor that I'm going to go after until I see proof that he's overcome that. And I don't think you're going to see that this year. It's going to be an up and down thing for him. So he's more of to me, a flex play, even in a 3 or 4 receiver league, where you go for that upside with him that he may break loose. Sammy Watkins is still the play here. He's advanced greatly as a route runner. And it was very much on display against Jalen Ramsey in limited reps, as well as with AJ Bouye. And I think Demarcus Robinson has a better shot of actually giving you stable play than either DeAnthony Thomas or Mecole Hardman. They're more functions of what's going to stretch out the offense. But really, it's Kelsey, and it's the Kelsey and Watkins show, and with a dash of whatever running backs who get the catches this week. And it's probably going to be Damian Williams getting the catches. So he'll have a good week, at least, as a space player. And then, LaShawn McCoy is going to do his thing, which is, show everybody that older backs like, Frank Gore, Adrian Peterson, Marshawn Lynch, when he was healthy, still have it and are kind of a special breed of guys. And I think that LaShawn McCoy is going to have a big week too.
Start all your Chiefs. Start all your Raiders, Matt. I mean, for people having to make these decisions at the margin, yeah. Derek Carr, Tyrell Williams, Darren Waller, and the one that might not seem as obvious, Josh Jacobs. Is Jacobs going to be in a game script? Is he still going to be heavily featured in a game where they're behind, or will we see more Jalen Richard? What's your outlook for Oakland? And Oakland played Kansas City tough last year, at least once, I think. So,
well, I mean, they're division rivals, so they know each other, and I think that that's fair to say. And certainly, John Gruden knows Andy Reid probably as well as anybody.
Yeah, right.
So when you look at it from that perspective, listen, Kansas City's defense is as bad as Kansas City's offense is good. So at this point of the season, there must starts against the Chiefs. And when it comes to Josh Jacobs, he's an excellent receiver, and you saw that he was used as a receiver early on. They're going to continue to go to him in that respect. It would not be surprising at all if Jalen Richard, as good as he is as a receiver, gets squeezed out of Oakland in terms of playing time and eventually ends up on another team at some point, because Josh Jacobs is probably the best rookie running back of the group in this class. And I would say that from a fantasy perspective, I think he's the best by far.
Gene, when will we see Albert Wilson again? And should we care?
Of course we care. We care about everybody. You never, ever like to see a aggravated muscle strain so soon after the injury. It always seems to be something that takes at least as long as the initial injury, if not longer. So there were a couple of weeks that Wilson was dealing with a calf leading into week 1. It was kind of added to the injury report pretty late in the week, but something that wasn't new necessarily. And then played, I don't know what, just a handful of snaps, maybe even 2 or 3.
5 routes, 4 targets.
Yeah, right. So it's going to be a bit. Definitely not this week. He didn't practice at all. You'd have to do a little bit more this week to feel comfortable saying, or following week rather, feel comfortable saying he'd be back in week 3. But this could easily be a 3 to 4 week situation, especially if he's not back to practice on Wednesday.
So lots of questions here. I'm just going to show some stuff because I want to give. I love this toy and the lion and and the lamb. Sincere Taylor says, and this is a specific decision: Josh Gordon with Antonio Brown likely out there, or Calvin Ridley with Julio's target share. We won't answer that specifically. But also, Brian Groh says, play everyone against Miami and every week all season. I like that. Everyone. That's unequivocal. Let's give some unequivocal advice, Matt, about. So you've got, it's complicated, right? Because you've got Gordon. Let's assume Brown's going to play because he's on the commissioner's exempt list. He's been practicing. You've got Gordon, Brown, Edelman. And you could approach this by ranking them. You could approach this by saying it doesn't matter. Play any of them if you have them. Then you have Michelle, White. And there was some weird thing out there about White and his chances he could be going to the delivery room, not missing that. He's going to play. And Michelle. So we got 3 wide receivers, 3 running backs. Give folks some actionable advice for their lineups this week.
I will, but I have to do a little bit of in-show scouting because it just occurred to me that Gene treats you like the kid in the examination room, and he treats me like the dumb adult who should know better in the examination room.
I'll take that. Do I get a lollipop?
I think you do. I think you do.
We don't do lollipops anymore. Just stickers.
Just stickers.
Yeah. I get a talking to from the practitioner. But that said, I think the order is Edelman, Gordon, Brown, based on familiarity and how the offense is structured, because the offense is used to motion Edelman around to determine what the coverage is. And Edelman is such a good route runner and very good at being able to figure out what the coverage is that he's the safest play. He's basically a running back in terms of how he's being used, in terms of the short area of the field, the number of touches that he's going to get. And as a result, as long as he's healthy, I think he's the safest player on the Patriots squad. Gordon benefits from Brown if Brown's in the on the field, basically because some teams, I would think that, the assumption of rational coaching is that he's not as familiar with everything, so you're not going to put the best cornerback on him. But then just the sheer fear of not doing that will probably be in a situation where Gordon's going to wind up with the inferior cornerback. And, it's just basically, if you want to talk about guys going downfield and winning the ball or winning the ball in the red zone, you might as well, you could have an entertaining contest all day long between who's better and not really come up with a good answer when it comes to Brown and Gordon. So Gordon will end up having a good day as a result of that. And Brown, it's just about familiarity with the offense and being on the same page with Brady. And Brady is not an improviser. Brady's much more of an ultra prepared guy. He's the top baker in the world, we'll put it that way. And Antonio Brown is that guy who really is used to dealing with a chef who yells and throws pans across the room and and then comes out to the staff later and says, well, maybe I'll just retire in the middle of my shift, and so I think it may take a little bit for Brown to get familiar with Brady, and this week I would say he's a guy that I probably wouldn't even start. I'd just wait and see how they're going to use him.
Gene, who are we rooting for to be Minkah Fitzpatrick's new team?
Whoever he wants.
Not the Steelers. I think I saw some sort of betting market put the Steelers as the favorite. No, they said this is an Eagles move through and through, I think, or maybe Seahawks, or really every team could use someone like Minkah Fitzpatrick.
Wherever.
Yeah, anywhere. Really, I think there was a graphic. I think it was Carter Donick who does some good stuff to put out the graphic. Here are the teams that could use Minkah Fitzpatrick, and it's like all 32 logos. Let's skip ahead, Gene, to Monday night and the Jets. And as you often do very tactfully, it's more for people like Matt and myself and many other talented people in the industry to talk about how Sam Darnold being out will affect Le'Veon Bell, or even how those defenders, because we saw a tale of 2 games with the CJ Mosley injury, but just what we know about Le'Veon Bell's injury and how that may affect his playing status and workload Monday night. What do we know?
I don't think we need to be too concerned about him. Ordinarily it's really strange when a player ends up getting an imaging study in the middle of the week, and it seems like it was reported yesterday what happened was that Todd Bowles called it Bell was just a little bit too aggressive in practice on Wednesday, which wasn't even really one of their game prep practices necessarily, which suggests that some sort of shoulder contusion or strain or something, something relatively minor, but enough that they wanted to make sure that he was okay to come back to practice the rest of the week. So they sent him for an MRI that was fine, practiced at least in limited fashion on Friday and Saturday. Bell said immediately after the MRI that he was good. There's no concern from the local writers. Since we don't know precisely what the injury is, it's hard to sign a relatively risk of recurrence or aggravation there, but certainly seems like he's preparing to play and get the workload that he's expected to.
And I want to, speaking of encounters here, Patrick Rasmussen says he met Gene at a medical conference in 97, 45 minutes late, interrupting the lecture, aviator glasses, and a Big Trouble in Little Chinatown t-shirt. Big Trouble in Little China, is it old enough now we can say, because we're all graybeards here, that it's a great All in the Reflexes, right? You all remember that. I mean, that's Kurt Russell's best movie by far. I mean, that's Kurt, that, or what else was he in? Was he in like Escape from New York or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He had me going there because I did not attend lectures on time, but the rest of that was not.
I'm pretty sure that was Cecil dressed up as Gene.
Yeah, absolutely. Love enforcer. And Adam Peabody, I should, speaking of Cecil, hit the like button and comment on the video on YouTube. Thanks for helping us grow this channel. Matt, let's talk about growing some wins for our fantasy team since we're on that Monday night game. Jets, Jamison Crowder, 14 catches for 99 yards. And now Trevor Siemian is in. Trevor Siemian is safe with the football, at least. So I don't know if we go to the Cleveland Browns defense. Would that make us think that we're underestimating Jamison Crowder if we have him at anything less than 6 or 7 or 8 catches? Is he a PPR slam dunk?
I think he's pretty close. Yeah. So, I mean, I think 4 to 6 is probably a good range to estimate with him, and probably somewhere between about 50 to 70 yards is his floor. So I like him as probably a flex play in PPR leagues, and I think that's a good way to go with him. Robbie Anderson's going to be a little bit more difficult this week. I think even though with Demarius Randall out, I think that it's still this team is it's a type of situation where maybe Robbie Anderson becomes a wide receiver 3 as opposed to a wide receiver 2 in terms of upside. But it's really, Cleveland's the show on this side of the, for fantasy owners at this point.
Yeah, and Jared, speaking of Cleveland, I've got to bring up Jared. Jared's in the chat room. He asked it's a favorite 80s action movie. And it isn't lame to like Die Hard, Gene. It's a tremendous film. So quotable. The turn of my car to Swiss cheese.
I just feel like it's a stock answer is all.
That's okay. Sometimes things are stock answers because that's good. When you come to New Orleans, you go to Pat O'Brien's for a hurricane, and you go to Cafe Du Monde for Cafe au lait and beignets because it's good. It's iconic. It's one of those experiences. Let's go back to the slate today. Speaking of iconic experiences, Matt, Steelers breakdowns and coverage. I think there was that one play that when it was Alex Kozora broke it down. He's fantastic. It was fantastic work on the Steelers, where they had like their best. Joe Hayden was on Rex Burkhead, and I don't even remember. I don't want to think about it. I'm blocking
Steven
it out.
Nelson covered his own player. Yes, in the end zone.
In the end zone.
And it was the best coverage all day, according to Kozora.
So first of all, Gene, any worries about Tyler Lockett in this one?
Yes, if only because it's back spasms. But we've not heard a lot of history of back spasms with Lockett in the past. He woke up with them, which suggests hopefully it wasn't a traumatic type injury left over from the week before. Increased his practice participation, isn't listed on the game status report at all. You have to watch their pregame warmups because we've seen time and time again players lock up at times, no pun intended, to have a little bit of an issue there. But I don't have much concern at all. And it should be a good matchup against Pittsburgh.
Yeah, so good tradition is playing wide receivers against the Steelers. And Cincinnati double covered. Isn't it crazy we're talking about Cincinnati as this great rational team now, and the Steelers as they're the goofus and the goofus and gallant here. But Matt, DK Metcalfe, and what I really liked last week is I saw Russell Wilson giving DK Metcalfe a chance to make plays downfield, and DK Metcalfe had some rookie moments, but he's a rookie. Is he going to have some highlight moments? How frisky do you get with him? Compare and contrast him with Mecole Hardman versus DK Metcalfe today. No
contest. You start DK Metcalfe. In fact, DK Metcalfe should probably be I would say you could go as risky as saying that he might be a low end wide receiver 2 this week. And the reason being is that not only are the Steelers the type of team that will play him physically, and then he will basically erase you at the line of scrimmage with his George Foreman-like punches, basically at the way his physicality there. Because he's not a guy that's going to run comeback routes and be able to kind of drop, pop, and snap back, and with efficient steps and footwork. It's going to take him 4 to 5 steps to get out of that route, and cornerbacks will eat him alive in that fashion. But you run those vertical routes with him across the field, the post, the go route, also crossing routes and over routes, and he's pretty good on the dig route for whatever reason. He's a little better on those speed turns. So he's a guy that is good in that respect. But what also that is hidden is that the Steelers are an aggressive team who bite on play action. So when you have there's some plays that are already embedded that they're using where Russell Wilson is running the ball, but it has them sending DK Metcalfe over the middle. And I watched DK Metcalfe get wide open on some plays where they ran the ball, that they're going to pull that ball a couple of times later on. Now that some teams will get a chance to watch a film and throw that, and Metcalfe will be wide open running, at top speed in the middle of the field, and he'll be behind linebackers. So it'll be the poor safeties that have to do something about that. And at that point, Steven Nelson might need to start covering his cornerback with the prospect of DK Metcalfe coming at him. So I think Metcalfe's in store for a big game.
Yeah, I think so too. And he drew a pass interference in the end zone last week, right? When it was on his release. It was his release that created that. Not even his physicality. DK Metcalfe. Go ahead.
Yeah, there was one where he drew a DPI against Kirkpatrick, and it was one where literally what ended up happening is he gave a swipe and kind of chopped over on the guy and hit his arm and knocked him off balance, but then used his other arm to swat down on the shoulder just for added measure, and that was it was enough for the official there to call it. He needs to study some DeAndre Hopkins tape, because if he studies DeAndre Hopkins can mug you and get away with it, and if he can learn to do what DeAndre Hopkins does, it's going to be crazy.
Yes, shades of Brandon Marshall in a way. Like, you want to jam me? Oh, well, good day, sir, and I will leave you in my wake. Let's try to. I think, Gene, we've covered all the big injury situations this morning. I mean, Kiki QT is going to play, but now with and what it means is start Deshaun Watson. And to echo what Matt was saying, I like DK Metcalfe in DFS lineups today a lot. Let's talk about, Gene, let's just touch on Marquis Brown, just because, as good as he was statistically in week 1, he didn't play very much. He is back on the injury report. He's another one of these players like a Metcalfe, like a John Ross, like a Terry McLaurin, like Hardman. They might be a top 5 wide receiver this week, or really come up empty in the box score. What do we think about Marquis Brown's injury situation?
Well, I didn't like the practice participation line. You never see somebody getting downgraded toward the end of the week with a new injury, and it's a hip rather than the foot that Brown was listed with. But we're seeing more and more teams choose to rest their players later in the week rather than Tuesday and Wednesday. So there's been a lot of DNPs, and Marquis Brown wasn't the only. Mark Andrews was also put in that situation by Baltimore this week, where he's listed on the injury report as, we'll see not injury related as the primary concern, but they were both listed with injuries. And you also didn't like the fact that he didn't play that much. But the Ravens, what were they up? 100 points in the first quarter on the Dolphins. So maybe that was the reason where they didn't put him out there as much. They saw what they needed to see from him. It doesn't necessarily mean that he already had a aggravation of some injury or another, or some soft tissue or conditioning situation. So John Harbaugh didn't have any problem saying that all of his questionable players were going to go, despite some of the weird practice participation lines. So were those 15 to 20 snaps the norm in the early season for Brown? Did it have something to do with the injury? Did it have something to do with game script? I think we're going to find out this week, but I don't have too much concern, other than I don't think you can expect 147 yards on 18 snaps week in, week out.
Okay, we've got about 10 minutes left. And I'm going to go lightning round with Matt, but Gene, keep your head on a swivel, because I may throw something at you and you never know what it's going to be. Matt, Buffalo at the Giants. We got San Francisco, Cincinnati we talked about. and Buffalo and the Giants, and because we're old, those matchups make me think of great Super Bowls. I don't know if we're going to see a great game between Buffalo and the Giants today, Matt. But with John Brown, with Josh Allen, for that matter, with Devin Singletary, is this just as simple as, hey, even though it was only after C.J. Mosley went out that Josh Allen got it going, and of course that was when John Brown got his touchdown. It's the Giants. We saw how easy. And as a background, let me step back. This is on the couch kind of thing. But week 2 gives us those data points that sometimes redefine what week 1 meant, right? So is it that Dak Prescott and Kellen Moore, et cetera, is just that good? We'll watch them in Washington today. Or is it the Giants defense is that bad? Do you count on the Giants defense being bad when you're setting the lineup and you have your Bills? And Rich K, if you're listening out there, I've got that tuxedo ready if the Bills offense is good all year this year.
Well, I have no Bills, but I will say this, that John Brown is certainly a guy that I'll continue to start as long as he's healthy, if I had him. Josh Allen, certainly against a Giants defense that was as bad as they were, he's what when people talk about Lamar Jackson, they're actually looking at Josh Allen. So, I would say that that's still coming to fruition, but Josh Allen is a guy that will be able to make plays with his feet and then throw the ball up for grabs or throw it behind the defense and do a pretty good job there. So I think that he's a decent gamble as a low-end quarterback one who has high-end quarterback one upside if he gets to run the ball and break the pocket and use his legs like he wants to. And then, after that, listen, Devin Singletary to me is let's wait and see. I didn't really watch a ton of him last week, but what I did see were wide open holes. If they can continue to create wide open holes that support the running backs don't matter crowd when they think of running backs, then, Devin Singletary might be, a play every week, but I'm kind of in wait and see mode. I'm going to study that game a little bit closer this week and see how that works out. And then in terms of the Giants, I think that, it's funny because the Giants face a much tougher defense. And so this is going to be an interesting game for them to see what we have there. Saquon Barkley's the type of guy that, if he wasn't quite as athletic, he'd be what Miles Sanders looked like last week. But he's so athletic, he can make mistakes and still get yardage in terms of what he does conceptually. He's basically the rule breaker for, that you need some technical ability to be a running back. He's a guy that, with his athletic skills, he can do things that most backs can't do and still get away with it.
Gene, will the Jaguars defense ever regain their swagger, or is this sort of Deshaun Watson air bomb? Kenny Stills, QT's back, Hopkins, Fuller, Jacksonville. Are we going to see anything like the 2017 Jacksonville defense again?
I think the swagger is at the quarterback position. Is it not now? Mr.
Yeah.
Minshew? Yeah.
Yes.
No, I'm betting on Watson against the Jaguars defense here for sure.
And should we bet on any offense in it's an AFC South divisional showdown day, week 2. In Indy and Tennessee, do we expect anything but defense in this game? Gene?
I don't know. Matt, you want to take that one? I'm not. That's not.
I was just
that doesn't sound very exciting to me.
I was spacing out. I was thinking about the fact that Gardner Minshew might be CC Carter's what is it, Bizarro twin or something.
Right. What I like about the Gardner Minshew thing is it should be a message to all players out there. Do you. And so Gardner Minshew has probably made hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars just on the impression he's made on everyone's consciousness, right? And his name too. So if you as a Sigmund Bloom and Gene, we would remember you for all your great takes, but the funny spelling will stick out. So give your kid something that sticks out. And then if he sticks out even more, Gardner Minshew now, how many people even knew who Gardner Minshew was a week ago? And if he didn't have that verve, the panache, then how many people would know about him today, except that he is going up against?
I've heard some names assigned to body parts that should not have been assigned to kids. So I don't know if that's good advice.
Ooh, wow. Yeah. So, okay. We'll turn the page quickly on that. So, Matt, Indiana and Tennessee. This looks to me, I said there's a lot of games on this week's slate that look like Greco-Roman or sumo matches, like wrestling matches, where teams are just going to lean against each other, play field position, play safe with the ball. Not great for fantasy. Do you think that describes Indianapolis and Tennessee today?
I mean, I think to an extent, I think you will see a little bit of a better output for the tight ends in terms of Ebron this week. I think people kind of overplayed the fact that he didn't have a good week last week, but he had the opportunity for a score in the red zone. I think that it's still about a feeling out process for what Jacoby does well. Jacoby Brissett does well under the lights with the familiarity that he now has. But yeah, it's going to be the Marlon Mack, Derrick Henry show with a side of tight end looks from guys like Delaney Walker and such. But I would say that the Titans have a better opportunity to be a downfield team and to be the better passing team this week. And I think that's because A.J. Brown is a monster. And I think that you're going to get to see that more and more and more, because there was a play last week, against Denzel Ward and Demarius Randall, where he played both of them like a pro. Yeah. It was, he played them like an all-pro player, and it was such an impressive look against coverage to run the route the way that he did. I think he's going to wind up being the number one wide receiver on that team, and a wide receiver too for the rest of the season from about week 6 on.
Gene, any prognosis on Ben Roethlisberger's bruised ego? Whatever.
Chronic.
Well played.
Terminal.
Yeah, eventually. Yeah, exactly. Put the Steelers season in hospice. We'll see what happens today. Matt, Lamar Jackson. If you're on the fence about Lamar Jackson and another quarterback today, and you think, well, was it just Miami's defense? It is Arizona's defense this week. Do you break ties in favor for or against Lamar Jackson this week?
Oh, definitely for you. I mean, I think he should be a top 5 quarterback against Arizona this week. I mean, for sure. The thing is that, the way that this offense is going to play, they're playing a defense that's used to spreading the field. Like the defense is used to playing an offense that spreads the field out and does a lot of work with splits that are a little bit wider. And now they're going to face this Baltimore Ravens offense that's going to play really tight and pound you. And it's going to be, and then on top of that, with Patrick Peterson out, you absolutely start Lamar Jackson. This could be almost as big of a show as the Miami game last week.
And a couple more things I'll pepper these guys with. But Lucifer means Lightbringer mentions again before you close out the chat, hit the like button. So thank you, everybody. Well, over 400 today. So if this is a sign of how it's going to go this year, thank you, everybody, for being part of what we do here on Sunday mornings. Again, because we're old enough, we harken back to the days of Jimmy the Greek, and Phyllis George, and the CB, Brent Musburger, and being part of. We have our own pregame show now.
Speaking of this, before he had a stick in. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Perfect. This is why you tune in to the show. And if you didn't tune in Thursday Night Live, well, we aren't going to tell you what you missed, but who knows? But Thursday nights now, the boundaries are starting to be, run over back and forth, so that there may not be a boundary anymore. Matt, who's going to have the bigger day? Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup?
Amari Cooper.
Okay. Gene, the Green Bay defense for real? This is another Greco-Roman sumo match. Green Bay and Minnesota for NFC North supremacy, or is this going to be a game about Kirk Cousins and Aaron Rodgers, or is it going to be a game about these defenses?
I think the offenses are probably coming around. The Green Bay and Chicago defenses are both good. Mitchell Trubisky, boy, that was bad.
Ooh, you might have started something there.
I don't even know where I was going with that. I don't think I was going to Michelle, but that's where my brain worked after I said Mitchell for some reason. But
it's because he insisted that we called him Mitchell instead of Mitch.
That's probably, I don't know. Anyway, can't edit out the live stuff here. I'm not a fan of Mitchell Trubisky, so I think the Green Bay defense, although I like lots of its pieces and some of the changes they've made at the edge rushing positions are positive. I think probably the improvement was first game of the season, Thursday night game, Mitchell Trubisky and that offense still struggling a little bit more so than buying in entirely to the Green Bay defense.
Matt, do we trust Cortland Sutton or Emmanuel Sanders with Joe Flacco facing that Chicago defense today?
I think you give Cortland Sutton a shot there. I think you give both of those guys a shot, and it's more as if you're looking as a wide receiver 3. Cortland Sutton looked pretty good last week in terms of his technique, which is something that was always a troublesome thing with him. So what I saw was encouraging last week.
Matt, which Falcons receiver tonight it will most greatly exceed expectations?
Most greatly exceed expectations. I'm,
Again,
I think
the subtext there, they all will.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
But I think you'll say that Calvin Ridley's probably the guy because everyone knows that Julio Jones is like, whether he's in the game all 4 quarters or for a quarter and a half, he'll probably get 150 yards. But Calvin Ridley's the guy. I think that we're going to see continual improvement from him from even his rookie year.
Gene, how many pass interference calls get reviewed in the Saints Rams today?
One very important one.
Yeah, of course. Hey, they'll never get over it down here. We'll never get over having so many wonderful people. Thank you, folks, by the way, everybody who reached out. Sorry we missed you last Sunday. Grandma Bloom is doing better. And thank you, everybody. And we feel you out there. We feel your love, and we want to send that love back to you. We gather around love of this game and the way it stimulates us. But really, it's a good excuse for a handshake and for us all to get to hang out on the infinitely long couch or the infinitely long sports bar and spend Sundays together and other time too. Thank you, everybody, for giving us that space, your time and attention, the most precious thing. And again, tune and give us your time and attention live, and you never know what you might hear that gets edited out when it goes out there for wide consumption, a big wide consumption day of NFL football. Atlanta, Philadelphia tonight. Enjoy that one because Monday night game might not be that great. And we got that Rams Saints game as a marquee game this afternoon, and 10 games going on. So the fire hose will be on. Thank you for drinking from the fire hose with us, folks, always, because you're so very classy.
Bloom Halloween, Ricky Williams wedding dress. That's